Hi everyone, welcome back to Shining Empathy. My name is Joel, and this is a deck review for the Sacred Geometry for the Visionary Path by Francene Hart. Francene Hart is actually the author and the artist of these cards. Kind of rare to see that, so very, very cool. I've made actually a list of points I wanted to go over with this, just for my deck reviews now in general, just because the very first deck review I did, I winged it. And I felt like I got a lot of the points, but as I went back over the decks, trying to prepare myself for the deck reviews and getting a pros and cons and what I liked about it, what I didn't like of each deck, I realized that there was a lot in the smaller details, and I wanted to really make sure I didn't miss anything, so I have that here as a reference for myself. So without further ado, let's get started. So obviously you can see this is a nice big book that it comes with, and as a result of that, the box that it came with was a really large box. Came with one of those kind of flimsy sort of inlets that the deck had to be divided into two parts. It was obvious that that was going to be not the permanent solution on how I was going to keep the cards, and even if I wanted to take that part out and just have the book and the cards inside the box, the cards are pretty small and they would have just been flying around and scrambling up. I'm one of those people that likes to keep my cards upright, so I didn't want them just flying around the box and getting completely scrambled. It also just doesn't leave a nice energy on them, in my opinion, when they're just getting shaken all up like that. So I actually had to go about and construct my very first Oracle card bag. I gotta say, it's really not that hard. I'm not a sewer by any stretch, and I just literally, I didn't even look up a pattern. I just kind of guesstimated everything and ended up with a bag that actually has worked out really, really well to just kind of hold the cards. Just a little drawstring on it. But I'm sure that, if you really didn't feel like you wanted to undertake sewing, you could just go out and buy a bag for the cards somewhere. But keep in mind that with this deck, you don't get one of those small boxes that perfectly contains the cards. You'll have to probably find another solution unless you're willing to keep them in the original box. But anyway, the book itself. Now, I love a nice big book. Okay. Right away, I think right down to the introduction when I first opened this book. One of the introductions here is conscious evolution and its connection to sacred geometry. So the whole driving force to this deck is that sacred geometry evolves consciousness. And that's what these cards are meant to do, is meant to bring things to the light that haven't been looked at or maybe sitting in the shadows, and to bring your consciousness a step forward. I just really resonated with that idea. I tend to think of everything as energy and consciousness, so it just really hit home with me. It really resonated. I like that it actually had the story and the motivation for it in here as well. I also talked about crop formations and a couple of things in the introduction. What is sacred geometry? So this book does go into detail about sacred geometry itself, which I gotta say, for this deck, if you want to be able to read these cards, you either have to know a good amount about sacred geometry, or you really gotta read this book, because some of the cards, like the majors, other than the color of the border and maybe a little bit of pattern on the shape itself, there's not a whole lot to go on intuitively in the picture. So unless you're just really good at reading shapes intuitively like that, mostly what I would go on was the color of the card, which I gotta say is, for me, that's sort of lacking. I want to be able to get more information from it than that. But anyway, further to the point. So one of the other things that was great about this book is that it came with spreads. Who doesn't like spreads? So there was a 3-card spread here. Now, one of the things that, because this is also my first Oracle deck, I wanted to get away from tarot and more of the traditional stuff. The Celtic spread. So the Celtic spread is great. It has a lot of information that can be taken out of it, but I felt it kind of linear, especially in terms of how it would talk about time in terms of past, present, and future. So I wanted to get away from that because I was starting to look at time as not linear and something that was more either simultaneous, all happening at once, because I'd been introduced to that concept and wanted to kind of read more from that place. So my favorite spread ever, which I still use to this day on every deck, there's actually a lot of spreads in here. I have to kind of show you this. So there's one spread here, a couple spreads here, more spreads. Like, there were a lot of spreads in this book, so awesome, good job, good job. Now, here is my favorite spread, the Seed of Life spread. And as you can see, it starts with the seed, or kind of like the root, and works its way around to the fruit. Now, the idea to that is that it's, you can even think of that as like the root or the beginning of the situation, and the fruit being sort of the outcome. And maybe you're thinking, okay, well, that's just the past, present, and then future. Well, maybe. If the situation it's talking about is happening right now, maybe that's the way it is. But the situation that the cards could be talking about could be completely in the past and have already completely unfolded. And the cards just want you to see it for how it unfolded and why it unfolded the way it did, because maybe you can't move past something because you can't see how it happened or why it happened the way it did for whatever reason. Maybe it's also talking about a situation that is completely in the future. So then all positions are technically taking place in the future. So that's why I really like this spread. It was not so boxed in. It could really talk about a situation and just give much more perspective and insight as to how things are unfolding and why they're unfolding the way they are. So I'm probably going to actually do some videos in the future and about spreads, very specific spreads, talk about them, show you how to do them, and this will probably be the very first one I do, just because it is my absolute go-to favorite spread. All right? So if you haven't checked it out, Seed of Life spread from the Sacred Geometry deck by Francene Hart. Do it. Check it out. Let's see here. So as far as the cards themselves are concerned, it goes into really, not crazy detail, but it gives, a fair amount. You get enough detail there. And it gives a nice large picture of the card. It's not color, unfortunately. One of the first things I intuitively pick up on cards is the color. It gives me a lot of information, the color choices, but at least you're getting the details in these pictures. You can always, if you're like me and you want to really absorb the card while you're reading the book and the images, just make sure you have the card out with you and just use it almost as like a bookmark while you're reading the information, just so that you can really kind of take it all in. And yeah, I think that's about all I need to say about the book. So it's a nice thick book, as you can see. Lots in here. All about sacred geometry, the cards, the motivations, lots of spreads in here. Really good book. I'd go as far as to say as it was worth picking up this deck just for the book, because I did take that spread away at the very least, and a lot of information about sacred geometry. So the cards themselves. There are 64 cards in this deck. That's a little bit more, I think, than the standard Oracle deck, which I would say are probably anywhere from like low 40s to mid 50s. 64 is where you're getting up in the range of a traditional tarot deck of cards, which I think, of course the number escapes me now, 74, 76, 78, I think. But there's a lot. So this is actually pretty close to that. What's kind of nice, though, is that, as you can see, the deck isn't too overly thick, and that's because the cards themselves are actually quite thin. They're not so thin that they feel fragile. The material that they used is actually really, it feels high quality, but it's not as rigid as a lot of the newer decks are. It also doesn't come with the edging that a lot of the newer decks come with, and I gotta say, I kind of like that. Maybe it was just because this deck came out, I don't know, maybe it was a choice, or maybe it was just before that became a real trend, because it is a bit of a trend right now. I personally I could take or leave the edging, just because it has caused more problems than it's worth on some decks, where like, if it isn't done properly, the decks will come to you and the cards are just all stuck together with it on the edges. And I've actually had cards rip as a result, as I'm trying to just delicately pull them apart, or flex them apart from each other, they still rip. So I don't know, I kind of like the nakedness of just having the cards feeling natural and nice in the hands like that without that kind of artificial edge. It's not something you see very often anymore now, so it's kind of, it's just kind of natural and nice. The size of them, they are a bit wide in this terms, so like, maybe if you have smaller hands, you'll have a hard time holding them this way, but they, because they're not super wide this way, they're still really quite easy to shuffle. You can also, of course, shuffle them the other way. I've always found that a bit awkward, but at least I have medium-sized hands, so it's not too difficult for me to shuffle this way. So overall, they're pretty easy to shuffle and hold. Now, as far as the card setup is concerned, so you can see, actually, it's probably not the best because it's all quite blue there. The border is a nice solid border, goes all the way around. The text is super legible, the number and the card subject or the keywords right at the bottom there. And they don't cover up the art. And I really like that because I always think of the art as like a canvas. I want to be able to see the entire canvas. Any little detail on a card can be very significant during a reading suddenly that maybe it wasn't significant in any other reading, but suddenly there's a detail jumping out at you. I don't want to feel like maybe there was a detail down there that I'm never going to get, especially when I know that these artists work really, really hard to put a lot of attention and detail and focus into telling a story here, and every detail that goes into the card is important. So I don't like to see any of that covered up. It just, even if there isn't anything that the artist or the author felt was significant there, and they thought, it could be without, it still feels like something's being left out, and I just feel kind of bad for the artist. So very cool setup here for that reason. You get the entire canvas. All right. Each card has a unique, well, not unique, there's sort of like a category of card color borders. And they're all very pastel, which is kind of nice. It's very soft. The deck overall has a softer pastel kind of feminine quality to it with the colors. But I gotta say, it has a good balance of masculine and feminine about it. There's a lot of kind of fiery action kind of cards and a lot of kind of browny sort of foundation-y stuff. And then there's also some really kind of like purpley and pink and lovely stuff too. And actually, let's just get into the imagery here. So this card deck actually comes with a lot of archetypes. I'm not going to be able to list all of them right off the top of my head, but the Divine Mother here. So it's kind of cool to see archetypes being worked into the sacred geometry like this. Now here's a card that is one of the majors, and the majors are essentially all the basic three-dimensional shapes. Okay, so like a pyramid, a cube, tetrahedrons, and stuff like that. So they all essentially have their own definition or meaning. I found them really difficult to intuitively read, and I would look at this card and see the orange and see the sort of fieriness on the pattern there, and take away a sort of transformation, change, action kind of take on this card. And that would be what would be the giveaway for me, but beyond that, the shape itself just doesn't intuitively read for me. Maybe it does for you, and if it does, you should definitely pick up this deck because, like, I gotta say, this is today still one of my favorite decks, even with all the reasons why I can't seem to read with it anymore. What's cool is that, again, the idea of sacred geometry evolving consciousness, I felt like this deck evolved me. I felt like it evolved the way that I read. It evolved me. It just took things to another level for me, and when I decided to leave them behind and move on to my new decks, things had changed. I was reading differently, and I suddenly was able to look at my cards and just be like, bam, bam, bam. And I had trust with myself. So regardless of whether or not I use these cards now, they evolved me, and I have such gratitude towards them for that and love for them. So let's go into a few other cards here. I don't want to take too much time with showing you too many images together. Now, here's a card where I can, it's an image, it's not a major, but the idea to the card was that this shape is just meant to kind of evolve your consciousness. This shape wants to make its way into your life, to add its energy to your life right now. So, keep the shape around and whatnot, and maybe take a picture of it and put it on your desk at work or something. that's not enough of a meaning for me. I want to be able to look at a card and relay more information either to a client or to myself. I don't want to necessarily just have to be like, okay, well, I just got to have this, this shape around for a while now and just let it kind of sink in. I mean, that's kind of a cool concept, but when you're just giving somebody a reading, I don't think they necessarily want to hear that. And even if it's what they need, they might not actually go ahead and take the action that they need to have that shape around them at all times. I have had people actually do that though, and they've actually noticed differences and changes since adding that shape into their world and their environment. But again, that's just one of the aspects of this deck that's kind of different. So let me just kind of keep moving forward here. Oh, Wheels of Light, which is like a little bit of a chakra card. Balance. Spiraling into Love, sort of like a lover's card. But there's another one in here called the Kiss, which is also sort of like a lover's card. But I feel like represents sort of more that first kiss. So it's there's something about it that's almost like the beginning of something rather than the evolution of where the relationship's taking you here. Oh, if you like mermaids. Now what's kind of cool about this deck is there's a lot of influences from a lot of different areas, like especially like sea stuff like mermaids, but animals in general. This is almost as much as it is a sacred geometry deck, it is also very much an animal deck. There are animals all throughout this deck. The octopus. This one's kind of like it's actually called octomotion, and it's literally just about getting moving, getting into motion. Let's see here. Oh, this is one of my favorite cards. Receiving, just a lovely open receiving kind of posture there. I personally am not very good with being open and receiving. I'm much more adept with giving. So I think that's why I find myself attracted to certain things, because I just need more of it in my life. So let's see here. Oh, another major shape there. So yeah, if you're looking at these cards like these majors here and you're like, oh, I'm getting so much off that card, you should definitely pick up this deck. But you might be like me and looking at that card and going, because like I would look at these cards and just, again, beyond the color and a few of the little hints in the paper that they use to construct the shapes, because they're not actually drawn. They're actually these like kind of cardboard made shapes that were then photographed, I believe. They I don't know, they were sort of just really difficult to work with, and I constantly had to move to the book and use it as a crutch, even after a couple of years of reading with these cards. So there's the Kiss that I was talking about. Now I'm gonna try and move through here really quick. I wanted to talk about this as well, because one of the things that I look for in a deck is the balancing of subjects. I don't necessarily like it when a deck is completely about one side of the equation. I like a balanced deck. Now I know that you can take a deck and be like, well, this is the love deck, so if you want to talk about love, let's use the love deck. If you want to talk about this or that, like there are obviously decks that have a very specific subject matter and they're meant to be read for that specific subject. Excuse me. And maybe they can actually be read for multiple variety of other subjects. But I like to see a deck that is balanced, that talks about light, that talks about love, but also talks about shadow aspects. I want to see the yin and the yang. I want to see the full spectrum of the human equation and the equation of life. We're here with all that, so I don't think it's healthy to just push all the other stuff away and just be like, no, we're just focusing on love and nothing else. The stuff is here. We have to, even if we don't want to invite it into our lives, it's there, and we have to face it. We have to confront those things and express them in some way. It's one of the things that art's great for. Let's see here. Another one of my favorite cards, Purification Meditation. I don't know if you can see here the fire that's coming off her in this meditative pose. Like, there's a lot of love here, but the fire is what always got me. And the fire actually symbolizes the burning of the ego during meditation, burning away of it. And it's just, what an image, just to see somebody with fire coming off them and knowing that they're burning away their ego. Oh, just love it. Let's see what we got here. Another major shape. So as you can see, like the imagery is it's a lot of pastel colors, very soft, and more animal stuff here. Actually, there's two cats back to back here. But like even this here, like with the man with the drum and the animal face, has a very Native American kind of vibe to it. And I gotta say, I really like that. It brings a certain tribal, earthy. There's something back to basics. I don't know. It really brought an element that I really loved about this deck. Even the person depicted here has a sort of native or if I'm using this word correctly, indigenous person kind of vibe to her. It just brings a culture to the cards that is unlike any other deck I'd ever seen, and it added something really beautiful for me. The Taurus. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever gotten into, what's his name? Nassim Haramein. And I believe he'd be considered a theoretical physicist. But he believes that the Taurus, the energy Taurus, is the most basic energetic shape in our universe. Or at least one of the most basic forms that energy takes. So like there'd be a torus around a proton and an atom. There'd be a torus around us coming out from our center, and we have a torus around us. There'd be a torus around our planet, around our sun, galaxy, the universe itself being a giant torus. It's just a very fundamental flow and movement of energy in the way it works. And there's actually things called like the double torus, that kind of like the two toruses stacked on each other. So there's another Taurus in this deck actually. Now, this is called the green Taurus, and the other one's called the heart Taurus. And like, they're both just two Tauruses depicted. I mean, green is even a very healing heart color to me, so to have one that's then called the heart Taurus, again, this is where the deck sort of faulted for me, because I had a hard time intuitively differentiating them. So, let's go through here. Oh, there it is right there. Gentle Spirits, and this one's kind of about just going with the flow, just being and allowing. At the same time, and to also leave you guys with a little bit of surprise, if you do decide to go and pick up this deck, I'm not going to show you very many cards, just enough to give you an idea. I hope you've gotten at least an idea on the color palette, because that was one of the things that really grabbed me with this deck. More animals, the Dolphin Merkaba. Somebody loves animals. I know I do. And then the sun, the swallow and the sun, which is very much just like I think, very similar to the sun card in tarot. It's a very positive image. It's always one of my favorites. Anyway, so overall, my impression of this deck is that, my feeling with this deck is I love this deck. It evolved my readings. I felt like it evolved me. It brought me to a new level. Even though I don't read with them now, and even when I've tried to read with them, I struggle. They're just not intuitive. They still hold a very special place in my heart, and anyone who's even remotely interested in sacred geometry, I would strongly, highly recommend go get this deck, because it can take you places. Just you got to be open to where this can take you. You got to be open to the study aspect a little bit, because there is a lot of information to take in, but it's worth it. And I think that's about it on this deck. So I hope you guys like this deck and you like this video. If you did, please go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Shining Empathy. And until next time, guys, love and light to you all. Bye for now.